Welcome to the Essential Career Skills series, in case you didn't know where you were. This is the last session of the semester, but this entire series is about being career ready. So career readiness is your ability to communicate your skills to employers and basically making sure that you're ready for the workforce and that you will succeed in the workplace or a lifelong career in hopefully management and beyond. So achieving career readiness comes through with 3 pillars: rigorous academic preparation, opportunity knowledge, and personal agency. So you get rigorous academic preparation just by going to your classes here at Purdue, but opportunity knowledge is the skills that you learn outside of the classroom, so come to events like this. And personal agency is your initiative and responsibility to ensure that you are ready to be on the workforce and communicate your skills to future employers and seek out experiences that will help you develop those skills. So as I mentioned, the series is around the lead competencies, and so there are 4 competency areas with 5 skills in each. And today we're going to be talking about collaboration. In the end, we hope that Boilermakers are known to be communicators, collaborators, self-aware, and thinkers, and those are some language that you can use in a future interview. So like I said, we're talking about collaboration today, and our guest speaker, Pablo, is going to speak on appropriate and productive relationships. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. Pablo Balcazar is the Policy Associate for the Policy Team at the American Immigration Council. In this role, he provides operational and logistical support, contributes to writing and research, and tracks policy work for the policy team. Prior to joining the Council, he worked on immigration, judiciary matters, and other related issues for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives as a Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Public Policy Fellow. He also did a service year with AmeriCorps Public Allies Program, where he worked within the Housing Department of the Damien Center, Indiana's oldest and largest AIDS service organization. Pablo holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Political Science from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And in his free time, Pablo enjoys playing board games, boxing, and playing soccer. Please help me welcome Pablo.
Thank you so much. Great, I want to make sure Hi, well thank you so much for the folks that made it out. I know this is a super busy weekend, so I appreciate you guys for coming through. If you don't have scrap paper, please feel free to pick up some scrap paper. And also thank you so much to LEAD for inviting me. This office was incredibly important in me figuring out what my leadership style was and how to go about service. So I really encourage you all to keep going to their events and their programming. And also, throughout the presentation, if there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We are obviously, there's a little bit of a smaller group, which is fantastic. We can get more, in the weeds with the people. So yeah, please feel free to raise your hand. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, about an hour out from Chicago, first generation college student. But I do have 3 older siblings, so shout out to the older siblings, giving them credit where credit is due. I graduated in 2020 with a bachelor's in liberal arts, majoring in sociology and political science, minoring in human rights, global studies, and Latin American and Latino studies. While I was here, some groups I was a part of included Delta Pi Rho, which is the Latino cultural fraternity, Purdue Immigrant Allies, the Purdue Mentor Program, the Path Street team, which is actually used to be with the LEAD office. I don't know if it still is. And then I was also a regular with the Latino Cultural Center events. After graduating, I did a service year with Public Allies, as was mentioned, with the Damien Center, where I got to do a lot of good work with caseworkers, learning the important role that they play for folks in housing situations, desperate housing situations. Then I relocated to DC to become a public policy fellow. And since the fellowship has ended, I've been with the American Immigration Council, where I've done things like help them organize events, help get folks who are in Customs and Border Patrol custody, help them get some sort of help before the credible fear interviews, and a litany of other projects connecting us to the Hill. So this is my little trajectory so far. It's been quite an interesting 4 years. So, one thing that I was able to find in each one of these spots was people that were really helpful in moving me along the way. That's part of the reason why I wanted to pick this topic. So we're going to be covering the importance of developing appropriate and productive relationships in your personal and professional life, the different forms those relationships take, how to distinguish them, why it's important to have a good balance of these different types of relationships. We're also going to be talking about how to maintain these relationships. I know a lot of y'all already know this stuff. It's just really good to revisit it, keep it fresh in your mind, because it's something that's just reoccurring. So throughout the presentation, there's going to be writing activities. So there's scrap, I don't know where the scrap paper is, it's somewhere around here. But if you need scrap paper, please grab some, or a writing utensil. I'm going to ask that you don't write your notes on a computer and laptop. I can explain that later. I'm not trying to be old. It's just, there's intention there, but let's just stay away from those, please. Also, I mean, it's a bit of a small group, so I'm sure this won't be an issue, but if I do see the same people participating, I might call you out. So you might as well raise your hand so you don't get called out. So, I like this, once you leave college, there isn't the same level of built-in support, but if you're intentional about how you move across your life and are reaching out to folks appropriately, you're going to find relationships that help you get by. I like this quote because it humanizes something that feels like an inapproachable topic. You know, we've all been told how important it is to build a network, make a good impression, and that is very true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to create a marketable version of yourself that isn't really you. There's plenty of people out there that are willing to help you just as you are now. So a strong network of personal and professional relationships that are varied and approached differently based on those variances are important, but also it's important for those relationships to be genuine. So for our first quick little writing assignment, please write down on your paper as many helpers as you can. This can be folks that have helped you with your professional or personal trajectory, maybe write a letter of rec for you, provide some sort of guidance. Maybe they're just like a solid friend that's been with you when need be. So I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, I think there's sufficient time to answer. Can I get a few examples? Raise their hand. Tell me a few examples of who they've had. Help them along the way.
My parents.
Your parents, that's an excellent example. Who else?
Your first boss.
Who?
The first boss.
A fierce boss?
Yeah, I mean, when it actually your first job, you will have some mentors. So your first boss will be kind of this.
I still remember my first boss, and they were fantastic. I was really lucky. That's a good example. You raise your hand?
I was just going to say friends, just like a solid friend group that you been part of for the longest time.
That is way more important than people give it credit for.
Academic advisors.
Who?
Academic advisors.
Yes, of course, advisors. I have so many advisors and still that I reach out to from Purdue that have helped me along the way. Thank you so much for your answers. So, am I too loud? No? Okay, sounds good. Earlier in my presentation, I talked about how I was lucky enough to come across so many folks that helped me on my path. So this time, I'm going to go through my timeline again, briefly, but I'm going to highlight some of those experiences, just a few in each one. Please, from now on, please feel free to keep writing helpers or moments that come to mind as I'm talking. So, my first helper I'm going to talk about is a professor. I actually met her in one of my first classes in Purdue. I was super interested in the subject, and I made time to go to her office hours, ask her about it. And over time, I got to know her very well. She became a huge mentor of mine, writing letters of recommendation, giving guidance. I've gone to her house at this point several times for food. That is like my rock solid mentor. I'm really happy to have had her, and there's a lot of mentoring moments there. But one of the ones that I want to share, one of my favorite ones, funny enough, came after I interned with her the summer after my freshman year. So the day after my internship ended, there was like this whole presentation and everything, and I was excited for it to be done. I was really happy with my experience. And she asked for coffee, and I was like, great, this is my dog now. Like, we're tight, this is fantastic. We get a coffee the next day, and I was expecting a very pleasant conversation, and it was a very pleasant conversation. But in that conversation, she expressed that she was disappointed in how I had done in the internship towards the end. because I had clearly been stretched too thin and I wasn't putting enough work into it. As someone that has a big ego, that annihilated me in the moment. But I look back at it really fondly because when someone cares enough to give you that kind of criticism, you should really hold that dear. Constructive criticism is something that you should be getting from your mentors, from your friends, from your advisors. So really appreciate that when you get it. Don't get too offended by it. We still had a very pleasant conversation. Obviously, we're still very close. So I'm really happy that that happened. So the next, let's go with the Damien Center now. So one interaction that stood out to me when I was there was with a coworker. This coworker was coming in as I was getting out. I was friendly with her, I helped her along the way, but there was really no guarantee that I was going to really get to know her that well. But I tried to go out of my way to help her out. Everyone here has been new in an office or new in a class. It sucks when no one's helping you out. Something that I talked to her about was applying to job opportunities towards the end of the service year, one of those being CHCI. And I was actually not going to apply to CHCI because I didn't think I was qualified, and she was one of the main factors that went into hyping me up, getting me more confident, pointing out the reasons why I'm more qualified. I end up applying, I end up getting into it, and it just completely changes my life. So, all of that to say, helpers don't have to be folks that you know from old relationships that are really long and drawn out. They don't have to be like supervisors, mentors. It can just be like was mentioned over there, a friend who is in the right place in the right time. So, leave a good impression with everyone, try to be genuine with everyone when possible. So next, I was at CHCI, working with the Congressman's office, which was a fantastic experience, but towards the end, I found myself not having a job offer when all my peers, all my fellows had already had job offers, and it was a pretty desperate situation. So I'm going to talk about, in this experience, I'm going to talk about two helpers, my chief of staff, and someone else that was a little bit unexpected, a bit of an acquaintance. So my chief of staff was someone obviously in a higher position I would have expected to help me out, but I did go out of my way to get closer to her. I was more intentional about that, and she helped me with networking, which is really huge, especially in DC. You have to know someone to get any type of job. She helped me with reviewing my resume, giving me really good feedback, and eventually one of those flags ended up getting me that job, flagged for that job. Someone else that I didn't expect to come out, but ended up being super crucial, was the friend of a friend that I met at a happy hour a year before applying to the job. So we were mutually interested in immigration. That's the work I ended up going into now. And I got her contact information because I knew that she was in that field doing good work. Initially, I was not going to reach out because I was like, I'm reaching out like a year later, looking for a job, asking for advice. It feels kind of awkward. I'm happy I did it because a few weeks after our coffee, she emails me a job application for an organization she's aware of. All of a sudden, I apply to it. That's the job that I have now. All of that to say, it can be really nerve-wracking to reach out for support, especially with people you don't know. But the truth is, there's plenty of people out there that just want to help, especially if you're out there having good intentions and putting your best foot forward. So, as you can tell from my story, there's a lot of different types of support. I needed a lot of different types of support to get to where I am. While it's good having relationships like your professors, your advisors, your directors, those aren't the only types of relationships that are going to get you along. So, what are some other titles for helpers that people can think of? You know, we've talked about friends, we've talked about directors. Are there any new ones that folks can think of that help them along?
Teachers.
Teachers, yes, that's a good one.
Sibling.
Sibling.
My brother.
My brother has been the best reviewer of resumes and applications possible. I don't know how he doesn't do it professionally. But definitely don't hype them up too much because then they're going to get in their head, but definitely rely on family. That's Luis, don't tell him I said that. So yeah, I think we got a lot of them. This is just a short list. I guess it is kind of a long list, but there's so many people in your life. These are just some examples of folks that may have helped you along the way. One of my favorite ones is coaches. People forget about how important that can be. Roommates, work friends, clients, friends of a friend. There's so many folks that are out there in your network. So really think about like names that come to mind when you see this. Just really quick with the names that you do have on your paper, if you can categorize these, just like if you see a name, tie it to a title, use these titles, use other titles. I forgot to put pet, but I feel like pet is not a very serious one, but yeah, just categorize them real quick. It should just take a little bit of time. Great, I think that should, I'm assuming that was enough time. You guys tell me if it wasn't enough time. I'm assuming that's enough time. Great, we'll go to the next thing. So keeping these relationships in mind, let's move to one of the biggest distinguishers that is going to come up in this presentation, personal and professional distinguishing. So this chart does a good job at separating the difference. Generally, you want to avoid high levels of intimacy with your professional relationships, keep a moderately formal approach to them, be respectful in how you communicate, and have some well-defined boundaries. Of course, sometimes relationships blur the lines a little bit. Maybe you have a professor, director, and advisor, and you keep your relationship even after school, even after a certain class, and they become more of a mentor figure that you can trust with more personal information. That blurs the lines a little bit. Or let's say you have a personal friend that you're going to be rooming with, and now all of a sudden you're going to have some very professional obligations that you're going to have that space to have those serious conversations. That also kind of blurs the lines a little bit. So you can have a wide range of conversation and have fun with your professional relationships. Just definitely make sure you are conscious of what is appropriate for the title at hand. Not everything has to feel like an interview. You're just going to know what's best for that. So we're going to run through some scenarios and how you would approach things based on who you're talking to. So let's say over the weekend, and these may or may not have been based on some of my experiences. I will neither confirm or deny any of that. But let's say over the weekend you're celebrating a friend's birthday and they just grab a bag of potatoes from Five Guys. I don't know if they still have the potatoes out. And they run off. You find them later making homemade fries. Let's say that happens and your professor later on asks you how your weekend was, how did you celebrate your friend's birthday, because they know that friend personally. What is an example of something you would tell them? You.
Well, you might leave out certain details because it's in a more professional setting and you don't know the professor personally. So you would say that you went to Five Guys with friends.
Yes, that is an excellent example of what you can keep it very simple. And I appreciate that you didn't just say, oh, it was fun. You added some details, it wasn't like a secret. But yes, exactly what you're saying. You don't want to overshare, especially with inappropriate topics. Not only because that puts you and your professor in a weird place, that kind of puts your friend in a weird place with that professor. Your relationships, they don't exist in a vacuum, and you need to be aware of how they can affect each other. So, this also applies to gossip, which especially is prevalent once you get out of college or in the workplace. So next, your professor gives you an extension on a paper and asks you to turn it in by the end of the day. You finally finish your paper, but you realize it's 3 a.m. So what are you going to do? You.
I will schedule email him an appropriate hour of the day and send it the next day.
That is exactly what I have written down. Fantastic. Whatever you do, do not send it at 3 a.m. That is something I've done before, and I was reprimanded for it. I'm happy that you don't need to learn how I learned. You should send it, wake up in the morning and send it. Maybe you want to apologize for sending it a bit late. That's fine. You don't have to overshare about like, oh, I was working till 3 a.m. And then I realized, don't overshare. Just keep it simple. You don't want to cross any professional boundaries by sending it at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So for the next scenario, if you're 21, great, just stay 21. If you're not 21, happy birthday, you're 21 now. So let's say you're at a work function after college, you're at a happy hour and there's an open bar. Should you drink? If so, how much? I'm going to read out some options so people don't get too creative. So for A, no. drinking is not appropriate at the workplace at all. B, 1 drink. C, 2 drinks. D, as much as you'd like, just as long as you don't get intoxicated. And E, other. So who thinks it's A? I dig it, I appreciate it. B? C? And D? Wow, very smart people here, I appreciate it. So whether it's a work function, the truth is, a lot of those can be the answer. It's definitely not D, but A, B, and C can very much be the answer. So whether it's a work function with drinks, a networking event with drinks, it can even be just a non-working related event, a personal event, but you have work colleagues in there. As long as there's anything associated with work, you should be approaching that as something that is adjacent to work and have some sort of boundaries. Obviously, you're going to approach a work function event differently than a dinner with a close work friend, but at the end of the day, if they're still connected to work, that's something you need to be aware of. If you don't feel pressure to drink, do not drink. Even in very happy hour friendly professions, because there's a lot of them out there, no one cares if you drink or not. No one's trying to peer pressure you. And if they are at that age, that's really lame, and you don't need to talk to them anyway. But that also doesn't mean you don't necessarily have to drink. If you want to drink a little bit, that's fine. Just know where your limits is. I would say you probably don't want to go past 2 or 3 drinks, especially in a long period of time. And the time to test your boundaries is not then. I've seen so many people test their boundaries at work events. People talk about it, it's embarrassing. Just don't do it then. So crossing boundaries compromises the integrity of the relationship and could be detrimental in the long run. Trust your gut on what feels right and be considerate of how you approach different relationships, especially professional ones. So what can this look like? So we're gonna try this out. We're gonna act out a scenario, right? Can I get a volunteer? So this is the scenario. I am a student. This is my professor. They're handing me a grade that's not fantastic. I took theater in college for 1 class. Feel pretty prepared for this. The sweaters.
So, Pablo,
Hey Vanessa, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, but grades aren't looking good. Did
What?
you not study or did you not
Can you-
prepare for the exam?
Can you just
Be more
can you give me some extra credit or something? I feel like we can just move past this, like we're friends.
I'm so sorry I cannot do that. You're just like any other
Are you
student
serious?
here. Yes. You're
And
like
scene.
any other student.
Thank you so much, Professor. Can we get a round of applause for the professor? Okay. So, I think you guys can hear me again. So, what are some red flags you guys saw? Or what are some things you saw that that pointed out that maybe something was wrong? What do you think was going on in that relationship? Or that situation?
Addressing the professor by first name.
Yes, that's clearly not something you should do. And people do it for some reason. Just don't do that. That's weird. What else is wrong? Something wrong?
The statement, can we get past this?
Yes, that is such a weird thing to say to your professor. But there are people that feel like them and their professors are bros. Your professor is not your bro. Just, they're your professor, treat them with that kind of respect. Thank you so much for you too. Can we get one more volunteer? Anyone that want to test their acting chops? Going once, going twice. You know what? That's totally fine. I appreciate the volunteer that we voluntold that we had, but we can just move past the scenarios. Great. We're going to be talking about the benefits of having some of these different relationships. So for the more professional relationships, like professors and employers, it's always helpful to have someone to go to that is going to be able to give you critiques and advice that are not clouded with the potential connection to a personal relationship. Obviously, some professional relationships do get kind of personal, and you can get close to them, even be kind of friends. But always keep in mind that that is a professional relationship. It's always helpful as well if someone who's like a professor of yours has an unclouded judgment of like who you are as a professional. If I'm sitting there addressing my professor by their first name, asking them for favors because I want to be a favorite student, that is maybe going to affect what a letter of recommendation looks like, or affect just even referring for a job. And this can obviously apply for like supervisors too. There's also relationships that are primarily personal but have professional elements, or professional but have personal elements. A good example for personal with professional elements is a roommate. Obviously there's a lot of serious obligation there. Professional with personal elements, someone that starts off with as like a work colleague, and eventually you guys become close friends, but there's still those professional obligations. So defining these types of boundaries could be especially important, because as you're preparing for the workforce, a lot of these relationships become the folks that you're like actual personal friends with. People keep up with a lot of the folks who they work with or used to work with. The impression that you leave on them is important, or let's say you meet folks at a networking event and you hit it off, they're in the same industry as you. You want to keep that relationship strong and professional in a certain way, because let's say that sours, now you automatically have someone that's speaking poorly of you in your profession, and that certainly happens. Cities are much smaller than you would think. And I want to give some time to a unique type of relationship for sure, like the acquaintance. You can call it acquaintance, a friend of a friend, whatever you want to call it. So with professional relationships, personal relationships, a lot of times they're taking both a lot of time and energy, which is totally fine. We should be giving time and energy to some of our relationships. A great thing about acquaintances, friends of a friend, is that they don't take much of either, but they can also be really beneficial. For example, the one friend that told me about the job. It's not like I was reaching out to her all the time or that she knew my life story, but it's important to leave a good impression with folks because it can come back and be really helpful. And on personal relationships, incredibly important to have. I think somebody mentioned the friendships, and I think that's really connected to your profession too, because if you have those personal relationships that are really strong, you have someone to vent to, you have someone that you can go to when you need it, you're not taking that to the workplace, and that's going to help you a lot. So let's talk about how to maintain these relationships. So no matter the type of relationship that you have, you need to put work into it to maintain it. Obviously, the first, I would say, one of the most important is to be respectful of their time. If you're showing up late, if you're being, not putting a lot of work into efforts that you have together, people know that and they can excuse it if they like you, even like a personal friend, but you don't want to be known as someone that is unreliable, whether it's in your professional or your personal relationships. If you don't know if you're going to be able to make something, be honest early. As soon as you find out you can't make something, you can't be respectful of someone's time, let them know immediately. Or just don't overcommit to things. I'm someone that overcommitted a lot when I was in college. I totally get it. Folks do that. It leads to burnout. But you are going to avoid burning a lot of bridges if you're just honest early. On the other side of the time, be intentional about giving people your time, especially when you're not seeing folks regularly. So let's say you're very good friends with someone in a class or a professor in a class, let's say you're very good friends with someone at work, and you eventually leave that class or leave that job. All of a sudden, the binding agent that kept you two together is not there anymore, and you need to be intentional about reaching out after the fact. This can take up a lot of time, and sometimes we have a lot of these life obligations that make those kind of intentional reaching out moments feel like they're just going to have to happen later. The thing that you think is impossible to wait for can probably wait for a 10-minute phone call. So just be intentional about that. It goes a long way. I would also say make sure you're listening effectively, phone out of your hand, focusing on them. If you need to check your phone if you're having a conversation, make it quick, tell them why you got to do it, and then put it down. You would be surprised how many people do this in a professional setting. It's off-putting and people can tell when you're not paying attention. So another example of this, of listening, is if you, like this, what's going on right now. If you have a presenter, like, and you're constantly on your phone, playing around on your laptop, people notice that. And that's just one example of how that can go on in the workplace. One of the reasons I asked y'all to write on the scrap paper instead of on your phone is because if you're writing on your scrap paper, I can tell you're paying attention, I can tell you're engaging. You very well might be engaging on your laptop, on your phone, but I can't tell that, and that might leave a bad impression if you want to get some sort of connection afterwards. You guys get where I'm going with this. And let's say you get a notification on your phone and you feel the urge to answer it. I get there, I've been there before. Just try to be as intentional as you can, you know, with reasonable limits. So if you're another last thing really quickly, if you are having trouble understanding someone, ask them to repeat it for them, and ask if it was right. It might sound kind of silly or like that to have someone repeat something, but it's going to show that you're actually listening and want to remember what they're saying. When you make people feel heard, they're more likely going to remember that conversation and you in a positive light. So let's talk about confronting conflict. Who here feels like they're really good at confronting conflict? They're just good at conflict management. Awesome. Yeah, no, I feel like a lot of times folks are not very comfortable with that, especially when they're still at the university level. So any relationship, especially personal ones, are going to run into conflict eventually. It's very natural. It's not something you should run away from. Folks tend to sweep it under the rug, but this can typically lead to miscommunication or distrust in the long run. So addressing conflict intentionally can prevent it from festering or becoming worse. Overcoming it can leave both parties with a greater sense of understanding and and trust in a mutual relationship. So we're going to go through some helpful steps when it comes to addressing conflict. The first of that is just accepting it. I think folks tend to lie to other people, lie to themselves, that conflict is happening because they don't want to deal with it. Like I said, it's supernatural in any relationship and really should not be feared. Once you've acknowledged, you need to make some sort of plan to talk directly to this person about it, approach the conversation with an empathetic mindset, and plan ahead so that you have a time that is not going to be a problem. So let's not pick a time where they're going to be rushing, you're going to be rushing, or either of you is going to be physically or emotionally spent. Talk directly about how you feel, what the specific problem is, and the impact it's having on you. So for example, I feel, strongest feeling, when you, the object description of the behavior, because specific impact, I would like, and then what would you like for that person to do or for you to do to prevent that problem. Of course, don't resort to name calling or blaming. You shouldn't interpret the other person's behavior, which is something a lot of people end up doing, which can sound like you always blank just to upset me. That's inferring that you know their intention, and that can set you off on the wrong foot. So instead, say, when you blank action, I feel blank. When listening to them, be mindful of your expressions, and if you need to practice this in a mirror before talking to someone, do that, because it's much better than having a stank face on while you're listening to someone you don't agree with. People can really tell what you're feeling about something, especially if you're not afraid to hide it on your face. Get everything out in the open. Don't leave any difficult part out of it just because you're like, oh, I'll just address that later. For real conflict management to happen, you have to address all points of the conflict. In working through a solution, be ready to contribute in your own way to the solution, so you're not just putting all the work on the person. This shows the person that you care enough as well about the relationship, about the moving forward, and it shows that you're invested. So yeah, just be sure to do that. Next, we're going to talk about being defensive. So whenever handling conflict or in any difficult situation in a relationship, be mindful of when you're getting defensive. Being defensive can look like justifying your actions, putting up walls, and can really damage relationships. When you are defensive, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you raise your hand. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. There's a camera in front.
you were talking about confronting problems or conflicts. Very often, if we do that, they'll just label you as confrontational.
Ooh.
I have experienced that. I've actually tried to go and say that, hey, can we talk? And then I said, I felt this way when this happened because it makes me feel bad. And can we do something? They just say like, oh my goodness, you're so confrontational, I don't want to talk about this. I have had this many times.
Mhm.
So, yes.
So are you
That
the
is-
problem? I'm joking. No, unfortunately, like if you're going about this situation with good intentions, you know, you're following a lot of this stuff and whatever you've learned along the way. Sometimes you also just have to be okay with knowing that they're not in the right place. There's been certainly times when I've approached conflict management and, you know, in picture perfect ways and people don't have a picture perfect response. You did everything you can do to help out that relationship. If they're not getting on board, then you can make some sort of, I probably should have mentioned this in the presentation too, but you're the one that's gonna have to make the decision to know it's like, okay, I'm okay with this and I'm not okay with that. And sometimes you're gonna have to create distance between yourself and that person. But tolerating conflict, especially when you've approached it with a good heart, begets more conflict, makes things more stressful. But, I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't know if anyone else has any more input on that and would like to talk about a situation that's similar. Go ahead.
What if you're confronting a conflict and the other person is not, what do you say, not accepting or receptive, and it strains your work life, it strains your professional work.
So this is in the workplace?
They'll take it personally and then they start showing it in different ways in the workplace, and you're like, should I have even spoken to this person?
So if you, like, having it be in the workplace makes it a whole other animal.
Okay.
If they are kind of overstepping professional boundaries and making your life harder, there's like work ethic problems with that. And no one wants to sound like a tattletale, obviously, but you can tell that person, hey, this is impacting, it's cool if you don't want to be cool on a personal level, that's fine, I can accept that. But if you're getting in the way of our like of me in the workplace, if I'm not feeling comfortable working in the workplace, that's a whole other issue. So you can be direct about like, if this doesn't stop, I'm gonna move it up the chain, I'm not gonna deal with this. Because you shouldn't have to deal with something that makes you feel uncomfortable in the workplace, especially if people are being petty or rude intentionally to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to tell them you're gonna move it up the chain. A lot of times that's gonna, maybe they're gonna be upset with you, maybe they're gonna talk, spit, that's fine.
Yeah,
But you shouldn't have to tolerate that. Go on.
there's always another thing that people do, it's just denial.
Oh, deny
I don't know
it?
what you're thinking about. You're the only one who's feeling this way. No,
Yeah,
I
like
didn't
gaslighting.
notice this. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that time when they say there's no problem at all, you
Mhm.
continue to persist. How will you resolve in a professional work environment without straining
Yeah.
your relationship or affecting your work?
What seems like the relationship's already super strained. So like we've already kind of pushed back to that boundary. I honestly
How
think
not to make it
talking.
worse.
Sorry?
How not to make it worse?
Yeah. It just seems like you should run that up the chain. And if hopefully your supervisor, your HR person, whoever it is understanding, you've built up a good relationship with them, they know that you wouldn't lie to them. That's really, it just, like I said, I'm not an expert, I feel like that's how I would approach it. I've been really blessed to not have too much conflict like that. That's that persistent, and I'm so sorry you're going through that. But yeah, I guess that's how I would approach it. But
Okay.
I would love to hear about other suggestions, you know, we're in a community. If there's any other suggestions on how she should approach it, I'd love to hear it.
I would like that being or talking with your supervisor, and this person has to be aware about the situation, especially if you are working with different areas.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that happened to me when I was working in industry, I had to work with different areas, accountability, sales. So you will have different relationships, but something that you have to build is a really good channel of communication with your supervisor. And maybe if someone from another department say something that is not correct for you or not making sense, you have to have this kind of conversation with your supervisor. This happened to me, what will you do? Or something that you can recommend me? Because maybe in the supervisor level, they can arrange the conflict or find another solution, for example. So I will support the idea that you have to be aware of your supervisor.
Yes, and that, I mean, like I had said earlier, different relationships cross paths in certain ways. In this situation, your relationship with your supervisor cross paths with this, because if you have that good, solid relationship with your advisor, like my friend was saying, they're going to trust you, and it should be, ideally, it should be resolved through that system. Every work environment has, you know, a set plan in place to deal with personal conflict. So I think that's the best way to go about it. But yeah, happy to talk about it afterwards too, if you want to really dig into it. Were there any other questions? Thank you so much for answering too. I thought that was really good think piece. Awesome. You're on the right side. Okay, great. So we're going to talk about being defensive. Whenever handling conflict, you have to be mindful of this. Defensiveness can really be sparked by insecurities and past traumas. And they can really damage your relationships, as I was saying before. So this defensiveness, I would say, is a reaction that your body does in the guise of defending you, but it's really protecting you from the feelings from feeling your fears associated with what's happening. So they basically let us hide our fears from ourselves. So here are some examples of being defensive: getting quiet, playing poor me, wanting the last word, catastrophizing. I think catastrophizing might be my favorite one personally. Obsessive thinking, flooding with information to prove a point. I'm sure that some of you guys recognize these in yourselves when you're being defensive. That's totally cool because everybody gets defensive. So once you know that what your defensiveness is, you can prepare for it. So let's say you start to slip into those feelings, you just got to acknowledge it. Just like conflict, the first step is knowing that you're in it, and then you just deal with it, and that's great. Next, I'm going to say you got to slow down. So distance yourself from this problem, take a breath, take a walk, maybe call a friend, and don't talk about it at all. Anything that you can do to slow down your mental and physical reactions to being defensive and distancing yourself from it in a healthy way. Next, I'm going to advise that you check with yourself to make sure you're not doing a lot of negative self-speak. Basically saying bad things about yourself, saying you're never going to get through this, that you're not worth it, all that jazz. And intentionally be giving yourself affirmations, speak positively to yourself. In the moment, this feels silly. I know, I've done it, I've felt silly doing it, but it does have an impact on how you're going to approach this situation and move past the feelings. So once you have this positive mindset going, I'm going to encourage you to take an action step. So this is when you take your defensive trait and not only move away from it, like we were doing with the slowing down phrase, but take an action to prevent it. So let's say you tend to close yourself off, make a plan to address it, whatever is happening that makes you defensive, in a respectful, empathetic way. Let's say you tend to start people what to do when you're getting defensive. Make sure you quiet yourself down, maybe even ask other people what they think they should do. So defensiveness is not something that you can conquer, so you're going to find yourself repeating these steps frequently. From now until you're 100 years old, hopefully everyone makes it that long. So in the end of the day, just it's something that our bodies do to defend us, and that's important to recognize, and there's no need to be angry at yourself or at your defensiveness. You know, it's just trying to protect you. So just own it, don't let it own you. So I'm going to give y'all some time to write down what you think you being defensive looks like, and then go through this list with acknowledging it, how you plan to step away from it, the what kind of affirmations you're going to give yourself when you are, you know, thinking negatively about yourself. You know what you sound like when you're talking negatively about yourself, and then what the action plan is going to be, right? Yeah, I'll give you guys some time to write. Great, I hope that people had enough time to think about that and write it out. Would anybody like to talk about what they look like when they're defensive? I know it's a bit more vulnerable, and that's important. Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, so the two from that list that really stuck out to me were catastrophizing and obsessive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I have really bad anxiety, and so that's typically how it manifests anyway. And so I know that during conflict, those are the two where it's like I can't get my mind off of it. I'm constantly thinking about it, and I'm also fearing the worst outcome. And so then, for the like action plan part of it, acknowledging it is like the first thing that you have to do, and acknowledge like why you're feeling that way, that it's not like bad for you, just like you said. And then I like to go on a walk and like physically get myself out of whatever physical space I'm in. And then I like to journal a lot, so for checking what I'm thinking and why I'm feeling that way. And then for the action step, I like to talk it out with other people before talking it out with whatever person is involved, and get as many opinions as possible. Yeah.
Awesome. It seems like you've already thought about this a lot, so that's fantastic that you already have that plan. And thank you so much for sharing, because I know it's a bit harder to share about that stuff, but I appreciate it. Does anybody else want to share? Let's go you, then you.
So, I am very defensive when it comes to certain criticisms or feedback, especially when it comes to quality of work or that talks about my skill sets. So, the points that jump out are all or nothing thinking, and wanting to be right and flooding with information to prove a point.
Oh yeah, I've
So
definitely
I
been
have all of those issues, but what I realized is I shouldn't immediately react. I should take a deep breath and take some time, or excuse myself and walk away from the situation, and then reply back when I'm a little bit more calm, because that way I actually don't go and try to prove a point or something. It'll give me some time to think about what they said. And I also realized that just because I'm getting a few criticisms or feedback, it doesn't define me as a person. It's just few things that I can fix.
That is excellent. You certainly know what you're doing when it comes to it. I'm also a very defensive person, so I can really relate to that. And one of my things is flooding with information. I'm a Virgo, so I just find everything I can and try to attack the problem, the defensiveness that way. So I'm happy you can relate. You were saying?
Yes, mine's kind of similar. I usually get quiet in situations. I don't really say anything because I usually just don't know what to say. But I do think that in order to like maybe take an action step for it, I'm not going to discourage myself from getting quiet, because usually it's just because I'm thinking. But I want to like maybe start actually like responding, usually maybe with more questions, because I feel like I get quiet because I'm sitting there thinking about it and thinking of all the ways that this could be going wrong. And yeah, I feel like asking more follow-up questions might like take this confrontation that seems like a huge deal and just de-escalate it a little bit.
That's actually a really, really good point. I'm happy you said that. I actually took a part out of this because I thought I was going to run over a bit too long about catastrophizing, because I think that's such a huge part of defensiveness. Any problem that's going on in your head is so much worse than the actual, like what actually is happening. Like whatever you're thinking, people are thinking about you, or exactly that catastrophizing. And the more you sit on it, it's festering in your head and you make the situation worse. So if that's something that you do, and I think all of us do it to some extent, it helps to talk to those people. When you've had a chance to distance yourself from it, you're not as upset, you're not going to be as attacky. And once you talk it out with people, even the hard subjects like conflict resolution, like feeling attacked in any way, you're going to feel so much better about it. There's been so many situations where I've built up a disaster in my head, and then I talk about it, and I was like, oh, it's not that deep. So that's a takeaway that I didn't even write down. It's not that deep. I promise you it's not that deep. Just talk it out with the people you need to talk it out with, and you're going to figure out that it's not that deep.
Yeah.
Sorry to repeat myself so much. Go ahead.
Good. But like, this is actually perfect timing because literally over the weekend I was like I was preparing to have what I thought would be a really big discussion with my roommate, and I was stressing about it, and I realized at a certain point that I was having the argument with a version of them in my head before even the actual argument can take place. And as soon as you can like take a step back and be like, okay, the discussion will be what it is, but the more you speculate now, that's not helping you, and you're not actually having what the discussion's gonna be. You're having like a worse version of it.
100%.
Worst case scenario version. And like that was really huge for me to just like have that moment of realization, take a step back, and then when I actually had the discussion, it was completely different from anything I could have expected, and it was okay.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, that's why I like once you make that plan to confront someone, especially if you tend to be someone that sweeps it under the rug, you just have to execute at some point. Because if you just sit on it and keep waiting, it's only going to get worse. It's like food, it rots. It's just going to get worse. But yeah, I'm so happy that it's a timely thing for you. I'm not happy you're going through it, obviously, but I'm happy that you shared
It was good timing because it's fine now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, y'all. Thank you all for sharing. So next, we're going to talk about my. Oh, okay, we're on the right place. Great. We're going to be talking. Oh, okay. The slide looks different. So, my favorite way of maintaining a relationship is also the simplest, and that is just expressing gratitude. So, in college, in your early professional life, there's going to be so many helpers that come across your path, and it's important to let them know that they are your helpers, that they've helped you along to get to where you are now, and especially not to take them for granted. Especially like on a campus, it just feels like there's so many professors, so many advisors, directors, friends that are like just on your side. Make sure you're going out of your way to thank them. So everyone likes to feel appreciated, you know, whether it's that more professional relationship, whether it's more personal relationship, or even whether it's just a stranger. If someone says something that makes your day, thank them for it. Don't just like take it and leave it, you know. So here are some ways to express your gratitude. The simplest is just tell them. Verbal expression is really important, or over the phone. You can do this after the fact, or if you think about it, let's say you think about it a few days later, you can still call them up, shoot them a text and say thank you. I've gotten those texts a lot. I have sent those texts and done those calls before, and it always brightens up someone's day, and someone's going to remember that. Gratitude letters and notes. So this shows you went the extra mile, especially if you're mailing it. People don't expect it. People don't really write like they used to back in the days, but people really appreciate it, and it gives them a token to remember you and remember that moment. A gift, I would opt for something that is more meaningful over expensive. You know, creative gifts work great. Some examples are like handmade crafts, a photo with a frame, and a note, offer to buy them a coffee, make them a playlist. That's so cool. Who doesn't want an individualized gift like that? Maybe just know what their favorite candy is so you can give that to them, or just some examples. A gratitude visit, just check in with someone, not with any asks or any necessary thing to talk about, just for the sake of getting to talk to them. People can really appreciate that. So, by a show of hands, does anybody have someone that they like to thank at all? Maybe you can think about the people you've written down. For folks not raising your hand, you've gotten here by yourselves. I'm so happy that you've never had a helper, you've never needed it. Okay, I think everyone does. So that is what we're going to do with our last activity. So everyone's going to get 2 postcards. With one of them, you're going to write a thank you card to someone that's helped you along the way. This can be personal, professional, It can be really anything. It doesn't have, you don't have to like bare your soul, just make it meaningful in your own little way. So if you know the address, then you can write down the address and then give it to us. We'd be happy to mail it. If you don't know the address, keep it. The stamp is already there, you don't have to get a stamp. And then just mail it yourself. With the other postcard, you can write some of the takeaways that you've had from this presentation. This can be how you're looking to improve your relationships, what do you plan on doing to hold up your boundaries. Maybe this triggered a boundary that you want to hold up in the future. Make sure you write it down. You can also write your defenses, how you plan on attacking your defenses. Whether it's something you've been thinking about for a while or something that was triggered by this discussion. So for this one, just put an address where we can mail it to you in the future. Let's say in July, wherever you're going to be in July, and we'll send it to you. So this is going to act as a reminder for you a few months down the line. Maybe right now you're thinking about conflict resolution, you're thinking about your defensiveness. I want to make sure that you're thinking about it in a few months too. It's just a way to check back in. Does that make sense? Wonderful. So we have plenty of extra postcards if people want to thank multiple people. But is there any questions? Any questions? Great. So let's recap. So be mindful of the differences in your relationships and be aware of the different ways to approach those relationships. Don't underestimate the importance of any relationship, acquaintance, personal friend, friend of a friend, really anything. Maintain your relationships by being respectful of time, giving your time, confronting conflict with an empathetic approach, being honest early. Conflict is uncomfortable, but believe me, once you get through the conflict, that relationship is going to be so much stronger afterwards. Recognize when you're feeling defensive, what that looks like, and how you're going to navigate it. Everyone gets defensive, so own your defensiveness. Don't let it own you. Express gratitude frequently and in creative ways. So we've all felt underappreciated before. Do more than just a quick thank you when possible. And yeah, that's just about everything. So I'm going to give you guys the rest of the time to write your letters. Please feel free to write multiple. And happy to connect and help out with any way I can. And thank you so much, y'all, for being here. Like I said, it was a busy weekend. It's a busy weekend for y'all. And thank you so much to the lead office for inviting me. I feel like this was a really great discussion for me on my end, too. But yeah, I'm going to give you the rest of the time. Oh, I think Lee had something to say, too.
Let's give Pablo a round of applause. Sorry, I